Okay, so today I want to follow up on a story that I covered yesterday. So yesterday I covered a story about the Caribbean leaders, that there was allegedly letters sent around to the Caribbean, to different leaders in the Caribbean, about the Cuban medical program. The Cuban medical program have been around for decades, I think over 50 years, where Cuban nurses and doctors go all over the world to work because, as we know, Cuba have some of the best medical practitioners in the world. So there was some rumor going around that Caribbean leaders received a letter from Marco Rubio warning them, telling them to put a stop to this program, to stop taking Cuban medical officials in their country, doctors and nurses. And if they refuse to do so, then they will lose their visa. The officials and their family will lose their visa. So now we can confirm that, yes, that is truth. And some of the leaders are coming out now pushing back against the Trump administration and Marco Rubio. So that is what I want to talk about today. So the first leader I'd like to talk about is the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves. So for everyone who knows Caribbean politics, know that the Prime Minister of St. Vincent have a good relationship with Cuba, going way back. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Michael Manley, and Maurice Bishop of Grenada had a close relationship with the Cuban government that was questioned for decades. So the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in a surprise visit to Jamaica, he was there in Jamaica to speak at the University of the West Indies, and he showed up at a PMP political rally supporting his friend Isaac Buchanan. So Isaac Buchanan was the lawyer for Vybz Kartel, popular superstar dancehall artist Vybz Kartel, and he's now running for a seat in the People's National Party, Jamaica. So Prime Minister of St. Vincent had a surprise visit to that political rally, and he spoke out against Marco Rubio and the Donald Trump administration trying to force Caribbean leaders to push their doctors, the Cuban doctors, out of the Caribbean. And this is what the Prime Minister of St. Vincent had to say.
Secretary of State of the United States of America has issued a statement that countries which are complicit, in his words, with trafficking in persons and exploiting Cuban professionals, the doctors and engineers who come, that those who are complicit would lose their passport, they lose their visas and their families. Now, I know we're not involved in any exploitation of Cuban workers. And I know that the Cubans are not involved either, the Cuban government. I know the arrangements. And I believe that the Secretary of State is a good and decent man. I would not say anything bad about him. I don't say things, it is not in my nature to say bad things about people unless I have the evidence. And I have no evidence. And he appears to me to be a good man. And if he knows the facts, I'm sure that he will understand that we are not involved in that. But if it is determined that you have to take away my visa and Eloise's visa, I want to say this publicly. It could be reported. I'm not looking for a fight with anybody. But we have to be honest and open. The hemodialysis which we do in St. Vincent at the Modern Medical and Diagnostic Center with these 60 persons, without the Cubans there, I will not be able to offer that service. So, does anybody expect that to go because I want to keep a visa, that I would let 60 persons from the poor and working people to die. It will never happen.
Okay, so that was the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in Jamaica speaking out about the Donald Trump administration and Marco Rubio and pretty much what they're doing in terms of threatening the Caribbean to remove Cuban doctors. And the thing is, this is just crazy because Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, and there are other Caribbean islands, if you remove the Cuban doctors out of the system would just crumble. There are a lot of Cuban doctors I know in Jamaica, and this has been a system, as I said, this system has been around for decades, because the reality is that Jamaica, there's always been a brain drain in Jamaica, and I know it's the same thing for a lot of other islands where as soon as you graduate from the University of the West Indies or any one of the universities in the Caribbean where you apply your trade as a doctor or a nurse, America, Canada, the UK is waiting. So a lot of the nurses, a lot of the doctors would leave the Caribbean and they would go overseas for a better life to pay off their student loan. So this program has always been around to pretty much replenish medical practitioners in the Caribbean. And chances are if you go to Jamaica right now, you know, there's a 50-50 chance that a doctor that you will see is a Cuban doctor. And for the Trump administration to come and try to demonize this program and to they're pretty much calling it human trafficking. I don't know how they got to that point, calling the Cuban medical program a form of human trafficking, that the Cuban government, they're sending out doctors in the Caribbean and across the world, and the doctors would have to get pay and send back to the Cuban government. And this is just ridiculous because this program, as I said, it's a program that's been around for decades. In Cuba, you have free education. The doctors in Cuba, they go to school for free and they become doctors without paying a cent in Cuba. So the program that they have now is doctors are able to go out, doctors and nurses, to go out across the world, not just in the Caribbean, and to work. And there is an agreement that they would pay back to the Cuban government. So it's not a form of slavery or a form of human trafficking where they would go to Jamaica and they're not making any money. They'll go to Trinidad and they're not making any money and everything goes back to the Cuban government. No, that's not the case. It is like any other program where, almost like a student loan program, you get a student loan and you pay back your debt. The only difference is that it is free in Cuba. So when you go and you apply your trade in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Russia or wherever, if you make $100 and you send back $25 to the Cuban government, how is that human trafficking? You know, so the next person that spoke up against this was Keith Raleigh, and he is the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. So let's take a look and see what the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago had to say about this. Here at Carib 21, I'm on a mission to showcase the vibrant culture and the breathtaking beauty of the Caribbean while showcasing our culture and what is trending. If you want to support me on this mission, please subscribe. And if you also want to support, you can hit the comment section and buy me a cup of coffee. In order to buy me a cup of coffee, you can follow these instructions. Just click more. You will see the link to buy me a cup of coffee. Click the link. You can purchase 1 or 2 cups of coffee and you'll be helping me to fulfill this mission. Thank you.
We rely a lot for our healthcare delivery on certain specialists who over the decades we have obtained from India, from the Philippines, sometimes from Africa, and mainly from Cuba. Out of the blue now we are being called human traffickers because we hire technical people who we pay top dollar equal to local rates, but we are now being accused of taking part in the program where people are being exploited. That's somebody's interpretation. And of course, there are local people here encouraging them to take away our US visas. Today, I just came back from California. And if I never there again in my life, I will ensure that the sovereignty of Trinidad and Tobago is known to its people and respected by all.
Okay, so that was the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said earlier on, there are thousands of Cuban doctors spread across the Caribbean. And as I said yesterday, it is so unfortunate because Marco Rubio has Cuban heritage. His parents are from Cuba. And not just Cuba, but just considering the Caribbean, for the Donald Trump administration to just step in and said, look what, get rid of all of your Cuban doctors. Not even knowing how many Cuban doctors in the system, not even considering the impact that this would have on the Caribbean. As the Prime Minister of St. Vincent alluded to, is that if he should remove these doctors from the hospital in St. Vincent, there's 60 people that would probably die because the doctors there, they are the ones that they're running the dialysis center. And I know that in Jamaica, they're critical care that Cuban doctors are in charge of. And you're going to try to force these government hands to remove doctors, not even considering, okay, what is going to happen to the patient? Is Donald Trump going to send American doctors to the Caribbean to replace these doctors that he's trying to force out of the system? And what is it about Cuba that it's like the American government, not just Donald Trump, but previous government, what is it about Cuba that you want to suffocate the life out of Cuba when you claim that Cuba is a terrorist country, Cuba, the communist government, and we've seen governments after governments dealing with Pakistan, dealing with Afghanistan, dealing with China, dealing with all these other countries that China, that you call the biggest threat to America, but there's a business relationship going on between China and America. What is it about Cuba? I don't know. And there's a Gleaner report that stated the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the pushback from the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And here's what the Gleaner article had to say about that.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has joined other Caribbean community Caricom leaders in defending the Cuban Health Brigade after the United States announced the expansion of an existing Cuba-related visa restriction policy that targets forced labor linked to the Cuban Labor Expert Program. Caricom countries have called for a meeting with Washington to discuss the issue after U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this expanded policy applies to current or former Cuban government officials and other individuals, including foreign government officials who are believed to be responsible for or involved in the Cuban Labor Export Program, particularly Cuba's overseas medical missions.
Okay, so that was the article coming out of the Gleaner, and it is said that the CARICOM heads of government, they are organizing a meeting with Marco Rubio, and they are going to get to the bottom of this. But I don't believe that the Caribbean should bow down to the Trump administration, and because the thing is that how are they going to replace the doctors? That is number one, and they shouldn't even have to think about replacing doctors because all the Caribbean islands are sovereign nation, and they are able to make choices, whatever choices they want. Canada has a relationship with the Cuban government. Are they going to tell Canada, like, do not have a relationship with the Cuban government? Are they going to go to all the countries across the world and say, look, you can't have a relationship with the Cuban government? And one of the things that a lot of people are looking out for too, because this has been a thing within the Caribbean where people don't think that the Caribbean leaders have like this united front. There are some leaders who would come out and speak up against certain things, and there are others who would just sit down and not say anything. So there are people that are waiting, like, I've gotten message and people are saying, when is your prime minister going to come out and say something? Because, Jamaica is a big voice in CARICOM and your prime minister need to come out and say something. So I'm hoping that Prime Minister Andrew Holness is going to come out strong too, with a strong statement and to show that the Caribbean is united. I'm also looking out for the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. I'm not sure if she released a message yet. Looking out for the Prime Minister of Grenada and all the prime ministers across the region, Caricom, to stand united because this is just not right. So guys, sound off in the comment section and let me know your thoughts on this. What do you think about the American government trying to remove Cuban medical workers, doctors and nurses from the Caribbean? And as I said, that is thousands of nurses and doctors across the Caribbean. And to try to say this is human trafficking is laughable. It is crazy because I know personally, I know Cuban doctors that went to Jamaica years ago. They stayed there, they work, they meet Jamaicans, they got married, and they're now living in Jamaica. And there's no, like, the Cuban government is not saying, oh, you have to come back or there's any restriction on how you can live your life. So I don't know how Marco Rubio, Donald Trump equate this to human trafficking. So guys, sound off in the comment section and let me know your thoughts on this one. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. And remember, peace. I'm out.